when 82-year-old Margaret walked down the aisle with the man 55 years younger. Her family walked out in anger, but what she revealed next at the altar left the entire church in stunned silence. Margaret Caldwell had always been the heart of her family, a retired school teacher known for her wisdom, grace, and warm cookies. So when she sent out wedding invitations at the age of 82, her children and grandchildren assumed it was some sort of mistake. But the name written next to hers wasn't some old friend or senior companion. It was Kyle Martin, a 27-year-old man from out of state. The family WhatsApp group exploded. Her eldest daughter called it madness. Her grandson, just 5 years younger than Kyle, threatened not to show up. No one could understand why Margaret, a widowed grandmother with 3 great-grandchildren, would marry someone who hadn't even been born when she retired. But Margaret stayed silent. She just smiled gently and said, "Please come. You'll understand." And so, reluctantly, they did. The wedding venue was a modest chapel in upstate New York, filled with lilies and sunlight. Family members arrived stiffly, barely greeting Kyle, who stood at the altar in a black suit, his hands trembling slightly. Margaret walked down the aisle on her own, radiant in a simple cream dress. The guests stared, some whispering, others looking away in shame or disbelief. Margaret's son refused to make eye contact. Her granddaughter whispered, "She's lost her mind." And yet, Margaret kept smiling, a smile not of foolishness, but of someone who knew something they didn't. The priest welcomed everyone and began the ceremony. But before the vows were exchanged, Margaret raised a hand gently and asked, "Before we go on, I'd like to say a few words." The room froze. Everyone expected an apology or perhaps an explanation of some late-life impulsiveness. But what Margaret began to share silenced even the loudest critics. 6 years ago, she began, I was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney failure. The doctors gave me months. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want pity. There were audible gasps. I enrolled in a volunteer study at St. Jude's, hoping to extend my life, not for me, but to see my great-granddaughter's first birthday. Her voice wavered, but her back stayed straight. That's where I met Kyle. He was the only volunteer who came to sit with the old patients, not for school credit, not for attention, just to be kind. Her family stared, speechless. Margaret continued, now with tears in her eyes. Kyle would read to me, bring me tea, talk to me like I mattered, like I wasn't already halfway gone. She smiled warmly at him, and slowly I started living again, not because of medicine, but because someone reminded me I was still alive. The room shifted. Grandchildren looked at one another uncomfortably. Margaret went on, "When my health improved, I told Kyle I was scared to go home, scared to be alone again. And he said, 'Then don't. Let me be your family.' There wasn't a dry eye left in the second row. I've lived more in the past 4 years than I did in the last 20, Margaret declared. We've traveled, we've laughed, we've cried. Kyle didn't just love me. He brought me back to life." Kyle's hand trembled again, but this time with emotion. People say I'm too old to fall in love again, but I say I'm finally old enough to understand what love really is. Her daughter's lips parted, tears threatening to spill. You see a young man and an old woman, but I see 2 souls that met at exactly the right time. Age isn't our story. Compassion is. There was a heavy silence in the room now, not of judgment, but of reflection. Margaret's grandson slowly sat up straighter, remembering how he hadn't visited in months. Her son's shoulders slumped in shame. Margaret looked at them and said, "I didn't bring you here to seek your approval. I brought you here to show you that love doesn't follow your rules. It follows the heart." Kyle stepped closer and gently took her hand. "If any of you wish to walk out," Margaret continued, "I won't hold it against you. But if you stay, I hope you'll stay with open eyes." Margaret turned to Kyle, her voice softening. "You once told me you didn't care what the world thought of us, that you just wanted to hold my hand until the very end. Well, I want to hold yours, not just in sickness, but in all the moments we still have." She smiled, now fully radiant. The priest, moved beyond words, nodded to continue. And as they exchanged vows, something shifted in the crowd. Her great-granddaughter clapped. Her daughter began to cry, and for the first time in years, Margaret's family saw her not as an old woman, but as a woman deeply, truly in love. When the ceremony ended, the applause was hesitant at first, then thunderous. Margaret's son approached Kyle and asked, "Did you ever expect this?" Kyle smiled through tears and said, "No, sir. I just knew she deserved not to die alone." The reception was intimate and joyful. The grandkids danced. Her daughter gave a toast. Margaret sat at the center table, surrounded by the love she thought she'd lost. Not everyone understood it, but they no longer questioned it. Love, real love, had silenced the critics. 3 months after the wedding, Margaret's condition worsened again, but this time she wasn't scared. Kyle stayed by her side, every day, every night. The family visited often now, the tension long gone. One evening, as Margaret rested on the porch in Kyle's arms, she whispered, "They came back, because you loved me first." Kyle nodded, tears streaming down his face. "And I always will." She passed quietly in her sleep 2 weeks later, hand in hand with the only man who ever saw her soul completely. The family didn't just gain a son-in-law. They gained a second chance to love better. At the memorial, Kyle stood before the same people who had once doubted him. He read aloud from Margaret's letter, "Let this love be a mirror. If a young man could love an old woman back to life, maybe we all can learn to love a little deeper, forgive a little quicker, and never judge what we don't understand." Her daughter held the letter to her heart. Her grandson hugged Kyle tightly. Margaret's life may have ended, but her story didn't. It lived on in the hearts of those who finally saw what she always believed, that love, when true, defies all timelines. In a world quick to judge, she reminded us that love doesn't count candles on a cake. It counts the moments that make life worth living.